All right, so the 1937 elections, this event was a consequence of the latest introduction of democracy in India, because when the successes of the roundtable conferences were summarized in form of a Government of India Act of 1935, the British government was more interested in the democratic form of government in India now. Let's just have a quick recap of the 1935's Government of India Act as well. See the first successes, that parliamentary form of government was introduced in which Indians were given representation, meant that they could negotiate with British for reforms. This also meant that British were planning to leave India since they transferred a lot of power to the Indians. Now, this is just an assumption. Okay, guys, this last point that it meant that British were trying to transfer this power. This is just an assumption because the democratic form of government went more power to the Indians. Since the Montfort reforms, when the diarchy was introduced, you see how certain subjects were given directly under Indian control here. And obviously, they did drop diarchy at certain levels in the roundtable conferences, but again, they approved certain provincial autonomies for the Muslims as well. And the democratic form of government meant that British were trying to give more autonomy, more power to the Indians over here. This is why the elections of 1937 were very important. Muslim League and Congress were the two major parties that were competing in these elections here. And these were the first major elections in which Muslim League had participated. Because if you see, since the formation of Muslim League in 1906, there wasn't any important occasion or any important democratic occasion where the League could have maybe showcased their power or their influence on the subcontinent. This was the first time ever that the British were also more interested in the elections. The Congress and the League had been contesting for years now. They had been fighting for power. They had been campaigning for different agendas. So this was the time to actually have a head-on competition between the two parties. And yeah, they fought these elections. Muslim League was unsuccessful. Why? Because of certain reasons. Let's look at those as well. First of all, Muslim League, number one, because this was the first major election that Muslim League was a part of. So yeah, they lacked organization, they lacked planning, they had no prior experience of fighting elections. This was one reason as to why Muslim League was unsuccessful. Number two, there was an image problem. Muslim League, it felt as if they campaigned for most of the time among the upper class financially. When we talk about the upper class, we were basically talking about the financial divisions here. The landlords, the landowners of that time were mostly in power in Muslim League. So the people actually thought that this is a party of the elite, and they are not representing the common Indian person, a common person of the subcontinent over there, the demands of the subcontinent. You see how we face similar problems till date in Pakistan. When a community is so divided among social classes in terms of wealth disparity, in terms of cultural social disparities, these problems, you cannot avoid these problems. Because Pakistan is a country with a very, you could say, with a lot of people living under the line of poverty. There are differences between the classes, the upper middle class, the middle class. And in terms of wealth, I'm talking about the wealth disparity. Whenever a country faces such an issue, there is always a problem that the political parties have to face in terms of the representations that they choose to showcase. Here, the reason why I'm giving you the example of Pakistan is because it's more relatable to you guys. You guys can actually relate to the current circumstances, and I think this will help you understand the image problem that the Muslim League had at that time as well. It was considered as a party of landlords, a party of aristocrats, a party of landowners, and people thought that they lacked a proper representation from Muslim side. This is why they didn't vote for them. Muslim League, they had not passed the Lahore Resolution. Lahore Resolution, we're going to talk about that in the 1940s time period. Muslim League, they didn't have a very clear agenda at that time. Although, yes, Jinnah did present as 14 points, but those 14 points weren't officially presented in form of a charter, in form of a report, in form of a resolution. Yeah. So Muslims thought that most of the people who supported Muslim League thought that they didn't have a clear aim, a clear agenda as to why the people should be voting for this political party. This is why these are the three reasons as to why Muslim League is unsuccessful. On the other hand, Congress had won these elections with the great majority, and they got a chance to form their government as well. As a result, there came this Congress rule of 1937 to 1939. What this rule was, because when Congress came into power in 1937, they obviously formed their own government, they made their own laws, they wanted to govern India according to their own policies. And you guys know that how Muslim League and Congress were always on this clash of ideology. Congress rule meant a troubled period for the Muslims here. So why was it hated so much by the Muslims? Number one, because they made Hindi the official language. Muslims and the Hindus always had this Urdu Hindi controversy. Muslims wanted Urdu to be the official language. Hindi was more associated with the Hinduism, the religion and the culture, the traditions of Hinduism, and the Muslims obviously opposed that. Muslims could not read or write Hindi. They could not take the central CSS examination, civil service examinations. Why? Because if you remember, during the time of Sir Syed Ahmad Khan, British had introduced these civil service exams for people to get employed in civil service, and those exams were English. Muslims had problems learning English at that time, and obviously they had problems clearing those exams and consequently getting government positions for jobs. This was the same problem that they faced over here. When the official language was Hindi, Muslims could not attain higher employment positions. Bande Mataram was made a compulsory nationalistic Indian song in schools. It became a national anthem of that era. Most obviously, the lyrics of the Bande Mataram contained certain elements that basically induced the nationalistic, you could say, nationalism in Hindus, in Indians in general, and they taught them to fight for the self-rule, because Congress had always campaigned for self-rule. So they were actually following that same agenda over here. Muslims are again threatened. They opposed all of these reforms. Congress introduced this Varda scheme. Varda scheme was basically a scheme where people had to bow down in front of the picture of Gandhi over here. Cotton weaving was introduced in schools. Congress had also banned the slaughtering of cows. Muslims felt again religiously threatened because it is important for the Muslims on the occasions of Eid. Azan was also banned. There were riots in the Muslim mosques, properties were burned, Muslim complaints used to be ignored. Vidya Mandir scheme was introduced. Vidya Mandir scheme was basically where they converted Hindu temples as the education centers. And they used to teach about the Hindu leaders, the Hindu heroes, and Muslim children were forced to convert to Hinduism as well. All right. So this was just an overview of what the Congress rule of 1937 to 39 was like. And this is why Muslims oppose this rule. Guys, you need to know at least 7 points for this Congress rule, because we will be attempting a 14-mark question right now, right after this part, that why was the Congress rule hated so much by the Muslims. You need to, these are the 7 points written in front of you. You can write it, you can write these points down, but remember, these are just the points. You need to write your own elaborations for these, and you need to also properly analyze each point. So when the Congress rule was over, because Congress leaders resigned in 1939 because of a clash with the British. British had promised Congress to make certain concessions in return for the Congress's support to the British in World War I. Congress was actually supporting the British. I mean, they expected more concessions from the British government, but the British, again, they turned their backs on the promises. Congress showed their anger and they resigned. This is where this Congress rule came to an end. Muslims celebrated a day of deliverance in 1939. Day of deliverance is when the Congress leaders had resigned. Muslims had shown all their hatred for the Congress rule. They were finally free. And this is the time when they realized that they had to do something to basically they had to do something for their own rights, to protect their own culture, because even if the British had left India, Congress will always dominate the Muslim League, and they had seen, you could say, a highlight of everything in these 2 years. So there's this question: was the celebration of the Day of Deliverance justified? You will talk about all the points as to why the Muslims hated the Congress rule over here. Let's just keep till here. Lahore resolution is the next point. We're gonna move on to the Lahore resolution after we just get done with this Congress rule. Guys, I'm telling you guys a question to write here. You need to attempt this as part of an assignment. It is a class assignment, and you need to get done with this question right now in class. Can you guys note this down? This is a 7-mark question, okay? And I'm just gonna read it out here. You need to write it down. So the question is that why did the Muslims celebrate the Day of Deliverance in 1939? 7 marks. A 7-mark question. Okay, I'm going to repeat this again. Why did the Muslims celebrate the Day of Deliverance in 1939? 7 marks. Is, have you noted the question? Is my screen visible, by the way? Okay. Question noted. So I'm going to just remind you guys of how to attempt a 7-mark question again. 3 points, 3 reasons, properly analyzed. The structure of a 7-mark question is, just a second. So basically, for a 7-mark question, you write the point, a statement, you explain the statement, and you analyze it. Analysis is basically how you link your reason to the question asked. All right. So you're going to follow a set of these 3 points thrice for a 7-mark question. First reason, point, explanation, analysis. Second reason, point, and explanation, analysis. And third reason, point, explanation, and analysis. So you need to pick any 3 points as to why the Muslims celebrated the Day of Deliverance. You can pick 3 points from these, the list given here, the Congress tyrannies, and then, for example, if you're talking about the Warda scheme here, okay, you explain the Warda scheme in detail, and then for the analysis, you write how did the introduction of Warda scheme contribute to the celebration of the Day of Deliverance at the end of 1939? Right? How did the Muslims feel so oppressed because of this Warda scheme that their celebration of the Day of Deliverance was justified? This is how you link the question. Okay. Then, for example, let's say if you're talking about Hindi becoming the official language, after the entire explanation, you write why was the amendment of the language here when Hindi was made the official language? How did this make the Day of Deliverance celebration so justified? You're going to talk about how oppressed the Muslims felt, and this is why, because of all the depression, because of the cultural religious threats, the celebration of that day was justified. Okay, Warda scheme was basically some practices that they had introduced in their education sector. For example, early in the morning, the students used to bow down in front of the picture of Gandhi and used to accept Gandhi as their leader, right? And cotton weaving, spinning of cotton was introduced in schools, which is obviously not a part of the curriculum. So all of these practices, Muslims felt as if they're being threatened. Yeah, all of this was unnecessary in the schooling systems here. This is what the Warda scheme was. Okay. I'm gonna stop the recording here.